Hello and welcome to NewsClick. I am Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. You are watching Present, Past and the Future. We have just witnessed an electoral verdict which marks an inflection point in India's social and political history. In the middle of 2018, when it appeared that the BJP was struggling, I had asked a senior party leader what their nightmare situation was. His reply, if the party was forced into an aggregate of state elections and not a single issue national poll. Barring a few states, these elections were primarily driven by just two sentiments. People unified along a majoritarian identity and confidence in Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He very successfully framed this entire election where he was the only option. But this was not an endorsement of his delivery, of the promises which he made in 2014. This mandate is chiefly an endorsement of his expanded definition of the nation's foes or enemies. They also brought into the central idea of Hindutva. The people believed that Modi's claim that he was the representative of the underdog, a man who would displace the post-colonial elite. There is a strong likelihood that the Prime Minister will eventually preside over an electoral authoritarian regime hiding behind institutional facade of representative democracy. Regular multi-party elections at all levels would of course continue, but like in these elections, it would not be a level playing field. This is certainly not the best of times for the health of Indian Republic. I have with me two very serious scholars to discuss the present situation and the possible scenario ahead. My first guest in this program is Professor Valbir Arora, very eminent political scientist. My other guest is Professor Anirudh Deshpande, a very eminent historian who teaches in Delhi University. Before we actually open up the discussion, like always, I would present certain propositions or certain theses. So my first viewpoint or thesis is what I'm just going to tell you, that the BJP in these elections not just legitimized anti-Muslim sentiment among large sections of people, but also bolstered it. Additionally, new urban hate groups were added, urban Naxals, Tukde Tukde gang. And in this, through sustained campaigning, secularists became the new political untouchables. Professor Arora, do you feel after this elections, when the verdict was coming out, do you felt that we were actually in a wrong republic, that we had completely misread the situation?
Well, I think we were getting prepared for a different result, but then in hindsight one realizes that all that barrage of exit polls was to prepare us for the real thing, but still it was a shock. The republic that we had grown used to has been under siege for some years now, and one was hoping that it would have a reprieve, that things would rectify. The institutions were stressed. As you said, the facade of elections and of representative democracy was there. Likely to continue. But the substance, the way in which institutions which are created by the Constitution are allowed to function in the way that the Constitution intended them to, is something that had been under severe strain. And I think that was the republic, plus the ideals of the republic. Liberty, equality, fraternity, justice. I think those ideals were being tested very severely but on the ground through the action of groups which were allowed to run loose without being checked.
Right. Project Hindutva is not a new project. Anirudh, we have seen it for the last 3.5 decades as to how from a very marginal force, as Mr. Modi put it very emphatically, that do se dobara, very good use of turn of phrase. But yes, it actually also underlines the project and the seriousness with which they have pursued their project, whereas the entire opposition has completely failed.
I think you are quite right, because what the opposition could not do was to, number one, unite in time. And the opposition did not really have a single focus, a single point on which it actually focused. And I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi very intelligently converted the entire electoral exercise into a sort of parliamentary referendum, in which
presidential referendum or parliament?
It's like a
parliamentary referendum, but a presidential election.
One wouldn't call
one
it.
Can actually put it anyway.
One wouldn't say it's a presidential referendum, because we simply don't have a presidential system.
But it became a kind of a presidential election.
Yes, it became a kind of electoral referendum, in which what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has always tried to do is to pit himself as a very popular leader who stands between the elites who have ruled this country in perception over the last 40-50 years and the popular masses of the country who have not benefited from that rule. So he has very effectively and very intelligently
what he says basically in 2014 it was Lutyens Delhi, and now it is the Khan Market gang.
That's right. I mean, there's Lutyens...
the club of the entitled people.
Yeah, Lutyens Delhi is not very far from Khan Market, as you know very well. Plus, the word Khan should not be mistaken.
It resonates. It resonates.
It certainly resonates amongst large numbers of people who draw most of their information from WhatsApp groups and Facebook posts and tweets and so on. So, in a way, it has been a referendum, and my conversations with people in the bazaars and in the streets and in the markets tells me that it ultimately boiled down, whether you like it or not, it boiled down to a referendum which placed two candidates in front of the people. On the one hand was a very seasoned politician who had proved, in their perception, his mettle as a three-time chief minister of Gujarat before becoming the prime minister of the country.
And this time somebody who completed his entire tenure.
Yes, he completed his entire tenure with more or less being in full control of the government as well as the cabinet and so on and so forth. And also very successfully having kept himself away in terms of not getting embroiled directly in many of the controversies created by activities of vigilante groups and so on.
So-called fringe forces.
Yes. And this became Modi versus Rahul Gandhi. And in front of Modi, besides him, on the lectern or on the stage, people had Rahul Gandhi, who was inexperienced, who seemed to be a good chap, but who did not seem to people as the sort of person who would be able to deliver what the people wished to be delivered to them.
Right.
So there was there was one seasoned politician on the one hand, and there was almost like a novice maverick sort of person on the other hand. And they have, it seems, reposed their faith in the seasoned politician.
Let me move ahead to my second proposition. That is, a verdict confirms continuation of the four tenets of sultanism, in which the absolute power is vested in the hands of just one individual. These are populism, nationalism, authoritarianism, and majoritarianism. But the BJP will continue grappling with casteism. This is one because the euphoria among sections of the OBC and the Dalit will fade once they realize that the upper caste hegemony is returning. That has been the basic fault line. We have seen, Professor Arora, Mandal Mandir, this used to be called always, the two main, epicenters or on which the entire fulcrum of politics. So Mandal politics has yielded to what we used to call Mandir politics, which is an overarching Hindu identity.
Commander politics.
But within this, Mandal, Kamandal,
Yes.
Mandir, that's basically through the Ram Janambhoomi movement. Eventually, do you see contradictions within the Hindu community coming up once again to create some kind of fissure within the electoral support which has been created by the BJP?
I wouldn't say the Hindu community. I think the active elements within the BJP and the Sangh Parivar would certainly be encouraged to undo this delicate balance that had been built up between Mandal and Komandal, where for successive terms the Ram Janambhoomi and the Mandir construction was kept a little bit on the back burner. The fear now, as you're putting
But this has been expanded.
is that this may be the signal for them to move forward on that, because the elements who push it, the upper castes, are more strongly represented in the power structure. Now, I think there is a big danger here of civil strife. And the problem that you will face is that all the other programs, all the other unfinished agenda that Mr. Modi has, where there are expectations that he'll push forward on some
Unfinished
reforms.
agenda like?
The structural reforms that are waiting, he said that in this one he had to fulfill the needs, the demands of the deprived, the poor. As he said, there are two categories,
Right.
the poor and those who want to help the poor.
Right.
So now the expectation is, after all, $500 million, how much the bonds that were sold, 90% were
95%.
95% went to the BJP. When so much money has been invested,
Obviously not from the poor.
it's not from the poor, it's from those who will want returns.
So they want their pound of flesh now.
They want performance which would satisfy their interest. So I think there is a tension there between fulfilling the agenda that you talked about and responding to the expectations of the money bags, because the power of money, we saw it in 2014, it is back in much greater strength in 2019. So he will have to take that
In fact, these have been possibly the most expensive elections.
Each
so far.
election is becoming more expensive than the previous
And
one.
I think I read a piece of news somewhere which claimed that the amount of money spent in these elections were far more than the money spent in the US elections last time, which is a humongous humongous amount of money for a poor country like India.
Because in a country like India, where you do not have transparency in electoral funding, a majority of the amount which is spent in elections actually goes unaccounted.
Yes.
It doesn't come on paper, it goes beneath. So all talk of black money being hit, struck.
Electoral bond money is completely secret, so you don't really know who is paying whom, how much. So
And we do not even know that whether it is coming from national sources or from international sources.
I think what Professor Arora has just said makes a lot of sense, because what is ultimately going to happen is that populism will come up against corporate interests.
Corporate interests, yeah.
Now the corporates would be happy with populism more in terms of symbolic value to the regime.
Symbolic value like?
To the regime. For instance, building a few more toilets or giving a few more cheap houses to people and things like that. Basically
gas cylinders.
Yeah, basically crumbs which fall off the middle class, upper middle class, rich tables into the hands of the poor, and the agency which does it is the government.
Sideways go in for labor reforms which does not give labor any protection, any security.
What they want, the kind of structural reforms, part 2, which Professor Saab was referring to.
What they have been saying is unilateral hire and fire.
Yes, what they want is nothing less than settling for a complete dismantling of all regulation.
Right.
Labor regulation.
labor and all these inconvenient environmental
checks and so on
and
and
so many things that come
But
up.
there would be international pressure. You have, after all, a huge global a lobby against global warming.
Yeah, but then internationally also the corporates have got such a strong grip over governments everywhere that the international pressures mounted upon the governments by the environmentalists would have to be weighed against this enormous amount of economic clout which these corporates actually wield. So that will lead to a major contradiction in between populism on the one hand and corporate interests on the other hand. It remains to be seen how this contradiction is going to be resolved in the case of a country like India, where a very large, I won't say majority, but a very large number of people are still dependent on natural resources like forests and and like mountains. And
yeah, linked with this is
agriculture
also
and so on.
Also this worry, Professor Arora, that in the last 5 years we have seen erosion of the integrity of a large number of democratic institutions, which are part of the system. We have seen as to how judiciary has been targeted. We have seen the role of the election commission in this particular election. We have seen various other bodies. Education is something which has been targeted very systematically, and the government has already come up with the new education policy. I and Professor Deshpande were talking about it just 2 days ago about this, that there is a clear agenda that the existing lot has to be junked and there are people who are already identified will be brought into the system, so that the educational institutions become factories to produce people with their kind of thinking. So there appears to be a very concerted bit into various systems of levels of checks and balances within the system.
Yes,
Would you agree with this?
Yeah. I think the danger goes even deeper, in the sense that nobody has a serious objection to creating more educational institutions and giving them resources, so that there is a thirst for education, and the state is not investing enough. So there is no objection to setting up new institutions. The threat is to freedom of expression, creative, and generally in such situations, it's the liberal humanities and social sciences which are first targeted, because they are seen as sowing the seeds of dissent.
Unfortunately, this began to be targeted right from the time the Congress was in power.
Indeed, yes.
So,
yes, but there are steps and steps, and I think we have moved 3 steps beyond.
Yes.
And there is still scope to totally crush all dissent. So that, again, you say that how would the world see it? Now, the government is sensitive to international pressure. It is sensitive to the image it has abroad, but up to a point. And I think that is where the real danger lies, is that we saw the extension of the slogan, for example, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and the Vishwas.
Sabka Vishwas.
Now, you will recall that he was labeled as the great divider. So now, to become the unifier.
I'll stop you on this, because what you are talking about is actually getting into my third proposition or the third thesis in this program.
Saying that, right?
The divider was, the fact that is he going to become the unifier?
Yeah. But can I just put forward my third thesis, which is that Prime Minister Modi's words promising an inclusive India and commitment that he would now seek the trust or vishwas of everyone cannot be taken at face value. This is a mandate that fed on majoritarian anxiety, and there is little chance for the BJP honouring its words. It may eventually be called a Jumla. Will it be? The problem is that this is not the first time Mr. Modi has made certain statements immediately after getting elected. In 2014 also, he called Parliament the temple of democracy. In his first 15th of August speech, he spoke in a manner in which he actually gave the confidence to people. I actually wrote a column in the Economic Times at that point, saying that for the first time, he signaled that his government also could be considered by those as theirs who did not vote for him and his party. It was a remarkable speech. But yes, Mr. Modi has quite often made brilliant speeches
He said that
The-
very same thing again.
You know,
I
he
mean,
said the
this
same thing.
He says
But
all the right
unfortunately,
things.
as I was asking somebody, what did you make out of the speech? He said, brilliant speech by somebody who does not mean a word of it. I think that kind of sums it up. What do you say?
Prime Minister Modi is in the van, absolutely no doubt about that. But we have to be a little worried about all those who are in the train.
Right.
I think I need not say anything more about that because, see, history has this tendency of both not repeating itself and repeating itself also. So whether this NDA 3 will be a repeat of NDA 2,
We do not know.
we don't know. Whether it will be different from NDA 2 and different in what way, we do not yet know.
But we must keep in mind that a day before the verdict, some people were beating up Muslims with sticks, and these videos have been going everywhere, and so far there has not been any public anger against this kind of targeting of anyone.
Or a word of reproach from the top. You see, that is the other thing. Lots of things happened, and a word at the right time from the top would have put some check or halt. It never came. It came 2 weeks later in some foreign capital. Now, you know, if that is, they say that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. On the other hand, the counter to that is that it's never too late to make amends. I would go for the second. If amends can be made for all the lapses which allowed the situation to get out of hand and caused untold misery to Muslims in the first instance, but other minorities also were unhappy. This inclusiveness that is being talked about would have served some purpose. But as you said, these speeches have also been made in the past.
Okay, Anirudh, what do you think are the options for the religious minorities in this country, and the other, even the other underprivileged, and even those people who say that, you know, it is a democratic right to disagree with you?
You see, it must be made very clear that dissent necessarily need not mean dissidence.
Right.
The difference between dissent and dissidence is extremely important. And that, unfortunately, is something which monolithic parties usually don't understand. And that is the problem not only with the Bharatiya Janata Party, but that is the problem with practically all the political parties we have. In almost all the political parties, dissent is, you know, automatically equated
Within the
with
party,
dissidence.
yes, it is.
And within the party, criticism becomes absolutely, you know, it's something very difficult to actually
Dissent in
foster.
the universities leads to sedition cases.
Sedition cases.
I mean,
Now-
it is absurd.
Now, the point is you may want to break into, let's say, international rankings as far as the universities are concerned. And in that process, you will obviously bureaucratize the universities further, because the universities you are actually competing with, especially those which are in China and Japan, are highly bureaucratic spaces. And they are not known for having promoted a great deal of critical thinking. Whereas the private universities, many of them located in the United States, or some in Canada, or in the UK, or in France or Germany, many of these private universities also have an atmosphere of great amount of discussion, debate, and there is absolutely, I mean, at certain levels, there is absolutely no control over the way people think and talk and something. And it's unheard of somebody being labeled anti-national or, you know, being slapped with sedition charges in, let's say, Harvard or, you know, Princeton or some other university abroad. So if you know, it also depends. It doesn't only depend on spending money on these universities, as Professor Arora pointed out. You may spend, you know, millions of rupees, actually crores of rupees on these universities. You may upgrade them. You may actually create first-class infrastructure, quote unquote, and you may actually break into these rankings by employing accreditation services and so on. Those things can be done.
Universities of eminence, institutions, all
you can
sorts
do
of
all
things.
those things. But unless thinking in these universities, unless the curricula in these universities allows for a range of opinion, a range of ideas to develop, the universities then become basically another set of
So
bureaucratic organizations.
are we moving into a situation, Professor Arora, where this country is increasingly becoming that the framework of thought is going to be put on the table by the political leadership, and then the rest of the society has to debate, discuss within that framework, and that too in black and white terms?
You know, signs of this have appeared at the level of the textbooks in schools.
Right.
And those are the formative years, the young minds, they are being told what to think. Chapters are being removed from history books and certain other. Now, you want to rewrite history, but rewriting history, you want to curb the tendency or the inclination of young minds to think out of the box, to think creatively. Ultimately, the big sufferer of this kind of regimentation where you are told what to think and there will be a thought police to go with it, is that the society in the long run, its creativity is stunted. You cannot contribute anything. You can contribute cadres, you can contribute technicians, and you can export, but you can't unless the scientific temper is maintained and unless you allow freedom and creativity on campuses to experiment, to say things that you may not like. But the world over, universities are allowed that freedom. That regimentation is something that would be disastrous for this country.
Not only for education, even for long-term economic growth and the attainment of technological sophistication in society. Amartya Sen in his works has very clearly pointed out the relationship between democracy and innovativeness.
Right.
The more democratic a society is,
the more innovative
it becomes. And the more innovative it becomes, the greater the propensity of people to think outside the box. So they come up with ideas. These ideas are not suppressed in their infancy. But
in most authoritarian regimes, the monopoly rights of being innovative or thinking out of the box is only with the system.
That's a very unfortunate thing which happens, and I think.
Then not question it. You cannot question demonetization even 3 years after that.
You see, for a country as diverse and as plural as India, which in the true sense of the word is a civilization.
Right.
To call India a country or merely a nation state, I think would belittle its existence over history. India is a civilization, and India, as Amartya Sen again said many years ago, India is as Rabindranath Tagore used to say, or even as Mahatma Gandhi used to say, India is a civilization in dialogue with others and itself.
Yes.
And
whereas in the other definition of the present regime, it's a civilization which is static, which has been settled. Everything has been settled.
Yeah, and it has been polluted by invaders, and that if only you could bring back that old purity. I think
which is basically a myth.
It's a myth, of course, it's a myth. But no, I'd like to pick up on one of the things that you said. You see, the whole populist idea is basically the idea of the people versus the elite. Now, there are elites and elites. You are not always turning them against the corporate sector, but you are telling the people that those elites, when you say Khan Market gang, or you say even the intellectuals and thinkers are transformed into an elite. They are in a sense an intellectual elite. But the moment you start denigrating your own intellectual leadership, you are leading the country into a desert of intellectual poverty.
Well, yes,
because it's a dialogue after all.
Yeah.
It cannot become a
So
monologue.
what we are actually fearing is possibly the end of dialogue. Well, thank you very much for the two of you to come and join me and talk about it.
Thank you.
These are indeed challenging times, but with the opposition in complete disarray, there is a possibility that the BJP will further widen its stranglehold across India. I would like to end this program with the words of Albert Einstein. He said, "Learn from yesterday live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Thank you very much for watching this program.